it's about just following the ritual work.
Yeah.
And so you can fool yourself into thinking there isn't one, but the evidence will be clear.
You won't believe how long the rap industry has been surrounded by rumors that refuse to die. From alleged hidden agendas to mysterious symbols and rituals, people have been connecting the dots and building theories for years. For the longest time, most of it was brushed off as pure conspiracy talk, until Cat Williams started calling out names and putting certain conversations front and center. And when the discussion turns to rappers who sparked endless questions and speculation, one artist always seems to end up at the center of the storm: Lil Uzi Vert. Yeah, we have to start with the artist who literally put a diamond in his forehead and left fans debating his entire image for years. Lil Uzi Vert has been at the heart of some of hip-hop's biggest "what is really going on here" conversations for a long time. And according to many people who follow these theories, the questions didn't begin with the diamond at all. They say it started with the music and the visuals surrounding it. Back in 2017, Uzi released Love Is Rage 2. The first thing theory watchers point to is the album artwork itself. One version shows Uzi with horns and wings while surrounded by skulls and broken hearts. Another version features him wearing an inverted cross chain. Then they bring up his old social media bio from that period, where he played around with spelling devil backward and slipped multiple sixes into the wording. None of those details prove anything on their own, but for people building these theories, that is where they believe the pattern first started to take shape. After that, the song titles became part of the conversation. One example they often mention is the track 444 plus 222. Their argument is that adding those numbers together eventually leads them towards symbolic interpretations involving sixes. From there, the number crunching gets even more intense as they try to connect everything back to 666. They also analyze his ad-libs, looking for references that fit the narrative. And according to those critics, the rage trap aesthetic, the red lighting, the upside-down imagery, and the overall chaos represented something much darker than simple heartbreak or rebellion. Cat Williams has a way of discussing topics like this that keeps conspiracy communities talking for months. He often frames these conversations around the idea that if people pay attention closely enough, the signs are already there.
Just following the ritual work.
Yeah.
And so you can fool yourself into thinking there isn't one, but the evidence will be clear.
Whether you believe those theories or not, that's exactly the perspective many critics use when they look at Uzi's career. In their eyes, every move, every symbol, and every decision carries a deeper meaning. Then came February 2021, the moment that poured gasoline on the conversation. Uzi shocked the internet after placing a massive pink diamond, reportedly worth tens of millions of dollars, directly in the center of his forehead. The second fans saw it, comparisons to the so-called third eye started spreading everywhere, with people linking it to all-seeing eye symbolism and discussions about spiritual awakening. Uzi explained it as a mix of beauty and pain. His critics, however, saw something completely different. Then there was the debate surrounding his stage name. Battle rapper Daylight once suggested that saying Lil Uzi Vert quickly sounds similar to Lucifer. The internet grabbed that theory and kept it alive for years. Uzi eventually pushed back, saying he doesn't even believe Satan exists, and describing the entire discussion as symbolic rather than literal. But here's where things get interesting. The people making accusations against Uzi often argue that he's only scratching the surface compared to the next artist on the list, because according to them, this next rapper didn't just embrace the imagery. Some of his own fans reportedly left concerts convinced that something felt seriously off inside those venues. Playboi Carti. If Uzi was experimenting with the look, critics say Carti fully built his identity around it. When he released Whole Lotta Red on Christmas Day 2020, many people who follow these discussions viewed it as a major turning point. Start with the artwork alone. Carti appeared in black and white wearing an upside-down cross. The album title stretched across the cover in a style that some people felt resembled dripping blood.
He expanded the image even further through his king vamp persona, borrowing heavily from vampire culture, gothic aesthetics, and punk influences. The theme continued with tracks like Vamp Anthem and King Vamp. Even the merchandise leaned heavily into that branding. Fans could find inverted crosses, coffin-inspired accessories, and dark graphic designs throughout the collection. To critics, the symbolism was no longer hidden between the lines. It was being displayed front and center. But the detail that sparked the most conversation wasn't the clothing or the artwork. It was what allegedly happened during the live performances. And this is where the story takes another turn, because now we're talking about someone who claims they were actually there. During Rolling Loud California 2023, Cardi's performance was reportedly cut short after fans rushed past barricades. After the incident, a woman named Royal, who had filmed herself leaving the venue, later appeared on No Jumper and explained what made her walk away. According to her, there was a reason she felt the need to get out of there.
It was just these crazy screams and something in my soul, I immediately dipped.
And she wasn't finished telling her story yet. What she described next is the exact moment that many people point to when they argue their case, treating it like the piece of evidence that changed everything.
Praying to him in the crowd, chanting his name. Apparently, one girl had passed out. People were bleeding.
Jesus Christ.
It was crazy.
Now the panel she was talking to pushed back.
The people on the panel weren't about to let that claim slide without a challenge. They quickly pushed back, pointing out that Cardi has been embracing this look and aesthetic for years, making it a major part of his public image. They also argued that someone unfamiliar with the culture might walk into a Slipknot concert and come away with the exact same reaction. Their position was that the visuals are part of the performance, not proof of anything supernatural. But even some of the skeptics sitting there admitted that the overall atmosphere felt unusual.
Freaky, I ain't gonna lie, when you look at his merch,
That same skeptic took the argument a step further, pointing to what they saw as a dramatic transformation from a regular skater-type artist into the pentagram-heavy 666 associated image that fans recognize today. Cardi's supporters, on the other hand, say all of it comes down to punk-inspired rebellion, performance art, and the shock value branding that defines his opium era. Critics point to the atmosphere before the shows and describe it as something closer to a ritual than a concert setup. Then they bring up stories claiming he isolates himself in completely dark rooms before performances, arguing that this is where he supposedly connects with a darker persona. But if a rage rapper performing under red lights sounds controversial, many people believe the next artist became the center of a far bigger and far more serious debate, one tied to a tragedy where 10 people lost their lives. Travis Scott. This situation is different because it involves a real-world disaster that resulted in the deaths of 10 people, ranging from a 9-year-old child to a 27-year-old adult during the Astroworld 2021 in Houston on November 5, 2021. That fact is not speculation or internet rumor. It is a documented tragedy that affected real families and real lives. Official investigations concluded that the deaths were accidental and were caused by compression asphyxia during a massive crowd surge. Authorities cited crowd control failures, security shortcomings, and a single stage design that drew tens of thousands of attendees toward the same area at once. No criminal charges were ultimately filed against Scott. Yet almost immediately after the event, social media became flooded with a completely different narrative. Some people insisted the deaths were not accidental at all. They claimed the tragedy was part of a ritualistic event, describing it as a blood sacrifice connected to fame, power, and hidden elites. Major outlets such as Forbes and The Guardian directly challenged those claims, labeling them part of a modern satanic panic-style narrative. The official findings do not support the ritual theory. However, because we're examining the arguments critics continue to raise, it's important to understand what they point to. First, they focus on the stage design. They argued that parts of the layout resembled an inverted cross leading toward a symbolic version of hell, particularly when combined with the flames and the large mountain-like structure at the center. They also highlighted a giant moving eyeball featured in the production, claiming it represented the all-seeing eye. Others compared the entrance tunnel, designed around Scott's open mouth, to imagery found in classic depictions of the underworld. To them, the entire setup appeared less like a concert entrance and more like a portal. This is exactly the type of discussion where critics frequently reference Cat Williams, because he often talks about looking beyond entertainment at the symbols and messages people believe are hidden in plain sight.
Is something that you do over and over and over again a certain way.
That idea of repeating specific symbols and themes over and over again is exactly what critics claim they see throughout Travis Scott's stage designs and live performances. Then the conversation shifts into numerology territory, which is where many of the arguments start becoming much harder to support. Some theorists tried connecting Scott and Drake's birthdays through a series of calculations that they claimed repeatedly landed on the number 6. They also attempted to tie those numbers to other dates and events. The problem was that even many of the people sharing the theory struggled to make the math consistently line up. Scott has repeatedly stated that he was heartbroken by what happened and said he didn't fully understand the severity of the situation until after the performance ended. Then came his Utopia era, packed with dark, futuristic, and dreamlike visuals that immediately gave critics fresh material to analyze. When you look at the available evidence, it points far more toward organizational and crowd management failures than anything supernatural. But despite that, the theory never really disappeared, and part of the reason is because the next artist took the entire conversation in a completely different direction. Instead of being connected to tragedy, she turned the accusations into something that looked almost like a challenge to her critics. Doja Cat. Unlike many artists who try to avoid these conversations, Doja Cat seemed to stare directly at the controversy and lean into it. During her Scarlet era in 2023, she fully embraced red-themed visuals, horn-inspired imagery, and aesthetics that appeared to mock the people accusing her of promoting something demonic. The biggest talking point was her music video for Demons, released in September of that year. In the video, she portrayed a horned, clawed demonic figure that terrorizes a suburban family, with actress Christina Ricci appearing as part of the cast. Some viewers immediately interpreted the imagery literally, but others argued that the video was loaded with references to classic horror films and symbolic storytelling that suggested a very different meaning. And here's where things get interesting. A music video analyst later broke down the visuals scene by scene, arguing that many of the details people were calling occult symbolism could actually be traced back to horror cinema influences. The analysis began with a strange painting hidden away in the attic, a detail many viewers completely missed on their first watch.
House, when lightning strikes, we can see a painting. This painting is called The Nightmare.
The analyst pointed out that the painting appears to reference an old demonic figure that has long been associated with stories of sleep paralysis. He also argued that many of the visuals that follow throughout the video seem heavily inspired by iconic horror movies rather than evidence of any literal occult message.
Is based on a lot is Poltergeist. Poltergeist is a 1982 film about children who encounter some demonic entities.
According to that analyst, the entire point was that Doja Cat was intentionally portraying herself as the villain that critics already believed her to be. His interpretation was that she was basically telling her detractors that if they hated what they were seeing, they were free to turn off the screen and walk away. In his view, it mirrored the way characters escape haunted houses in classic horror films. That explanation, however, did absolutely nothing to quiet the criticism. Detractors immediately pointed to the visuals in her Paint the Town Red video, the Grim Reaper imagery, and the overwhelming use of red throughout her work. They also referenced her headline-grabbing appearance at Schiaparelli's Pirelli's Paris fashion event in January 2023, where she was covered in roughly 30,000 red crystals inspired by Dante's Inferno. Critics labeled the look a humiliation ritual, a theory claiming powerful industry figures force celebrities into extreme public displays to maintain control over them. The concept itself has circulated online for years. Doja's response was to lean into the jokes rather than defend herself. She posted that she had joined the Illuminati, added sparkles for effect, mocked the theories, and described the crystal-covered look as nothing more than artistic expression. She has also said that she believes in a higher power and finds many of the rumors surrounding her frustrating. But if Doja responded with sarcasm, many people argue the next artist pushed the controversy to an entirely different level. This is the artist who famously slid down a pole into hell, danced with the devil, and became the center of one of the biggest culture war debates in modern music, Lil Nas X. If Doja Cat playfully challenged her critics, Lil Nas X kicked the entire conversation into overdrive. When he released Montero, Call Me By Your Name, in March 2021, the backlash exploded almost instantly across the world. The video unfolds like a symbolic fantasy story. It begins in a paradise-like setting where he is tempted by a serpent, is cast out, and then dramatically descends from heaven into hell using a giant pole. Once there, he performs a provocative dance for a horned devil before snapping the devil's neck, taking the crown, and sitting on the throne himself. To many religious critics, the imagery crossed a line. Others went even further, claiming it represented a satanic message being delivered to millions of young viewers who previously knew him mainly from Old Town Road. The controversy didn't stop with the music video. Around the same time, Lil Nas X partnered with MSCHFE to release 666 pairs of so-called Satan shoes. The customized sneakers featured a pentagram, an inverted cross, a Bible verse reference, and the claim that a drop of human blood had been placed inside each sole. The shoes sold out almost immediately. Soon after, Nike filed a lawsuit over trademark concerns, and the release was ultimately halted. This became a textbook example of a recurring American debate around religion, symbolism, and pop culture. One religion scholar appearing on MSNBC explained that the backlash fit into a much older pattern stretching back decades, from fears surrounding hidden messages in records to controversies involving heavy metal music. Lil Nas X has consistently maintained that the entire project was meant as a metaphor. He explained that the video reflected his experience growing up as a gay kid who was repeatedly told he was destined for hell. So in the story, he went there and took control of it. Instead of accepting the condemnation, he flipped the narrative back on the people judging him. Then he doubled down on the trolling, releasing a fake apology and openly joking about the outrage online. This is also why people often connect discussions like these to comments made by Cat Williams, who frequently talks about temptation, power, and the choices people make when they believe the world is being offered to them.
Jesus getting to the mountaintop and the devil saying you can have all of it.
And the way Cat Williams frames these conversations, the real issue was never the offer itself. In his view, the bigger question has always been what kind of person you choose to become when that opportunity, temptation, or source of power is placed directly in front of you.
These situations, I don't even leave it up to me. Like, I'm gonna do what the superhero would do.
Lil Nas X took that exact concept and transformed it into a chart-topping hit that dominated the conversation. Critics argued he was marketing controversy, while he maintained that he was simply taking control of the narrative and coming out on top. And that brings us to the next rapper, because unlike Lil Nas X, this artist wasn't accused of turning the idea into performance art or symbolism. According to the people who follow these theories, he spoke about it in a way that sounded far less theatrical. In their view, it came across almost like he was describing a real business arrangement that had actually taken place behind closed doors. DaBaby is an especially interesting example because he ended up giving critics exactly the type of material they love to analyze. Instead of vague symbolism or cryptic imagery, he offered a calm and straightforward explanation of what selling your soul supposedly means, using his own words during an interview. In that conversation, DaBaby didn't describe it as devils, pentagrams, or anything supernatural. He framed it as compromise, sacrifice, and the choices people make when success starts demanding pieces of who they are.
It's like if somebody tells you to do something that doesn't align with your morals.
He didn't stop there either. He continued by laying out a surprisingly detailed and down-to-earth example, describing the process in a way that sounded less like a mysterious legend and more like an everyday transaction, which is exactly why so many people paid attention to what he said next.
This club, you gotta come in here with your out. You gotta come in here and twerk to the music, goddammit.
His argument was simple. If you abandon your values or go against your true character just to reach a bigger opportunity, that's what selling your soul actually means. In his view, there doesn't need to be any supernatural element involved. Of course, a lot of people heard that explanation and immediately interpreted it in the exact opposite way, treating it as indirect proof that the literal version of the story exists, and suggesting that his string of chart success in 2020 came with hidden consequences. Critics also pointed toward the imagery in his music videos. His collaboration with Roddy Ricch, Rockstar, featured a zombie apocalypse setting that some theorists interpreted as symbolism for industry control and conformity. Then, in 2022, he released visuals portraying himself as a wounded Jesus-like figure on a cross, surrounded by apocalyptic scenes involving hellish and flood imagery, which sparked criticism from some Christian commentators. The backlash was amplified because one of his earliest nicknames was Baby Jesus. DaBaby's own position, however, has consistently been that he rejected the kinds of opportunities he felt would require compromising who he was. He claimed that certain higher-level doors could have opened if he had joined what he described as the industry's cool kids club, but he chose not to. He presents himself as someone who stayed independent and held on to his principles. But here's where the story takes another turn. DaBaby talked about the supposed offer and claimed he turned it down. The next two names on the list, however, are a pair of internet-famous twins who publicly suggested the opposite during a live stream before appearing to regret the attention almost immediately afterward. The Island Boys. The twin brothers Alex Venegas and Frankie Venegas exploded onto the internet in 2021 after a viral poolside freestyle turned them into worldwide memes almost overnight. Not long after their rise to fame, clips began circulating online showing one of the brothers speaking openly about the idea of selling his soul. During a live stream, Fly Soldier, also known as Alex, explained his thoughts in a surprisingly direct way.
I sold my soul. You understand what I'm saying?
Unlike DaBaby, he didn't present the idea as a symbolic lesson about compromise or personal choices. Instead, he spoke about it in a way that sounded much more literal, describing it as a transaction that came with real consequences. According to his explanation, the price paid in that exchange wasn't money, fame, or opportunity. It was a piece of himself.
You gotta sacrifice someone that you really love, and I sacrificed myself.
He went on to tell a story in which a demonic figure supposedly asked whether he was certain about making the sacrifice and whether someone he cared about would be the one to pay the price. According to his account, he claimed that he chose himself instead. But the detail that continues to grab people's attention isn't the story itself. It's what he said happened afterward, because that's the part many viewers describe as the most unsettling.
So I did what I had to do. It is what it is.
He claimed that ever since that experience, he had struggled with anxiety almost every day. According to his story, he asked for fame and financial success, but said the rewards he expected never fully arrived. What's interesting, though, is that many of the viral clips people use as evidence actually come from a pastor's response video, and that completely changes the context. The pastor argued that selling your soul isn't something that can literally happen, according to biblical teaching. His position was that deceptive influences convince vulnerable people they're already beyond saving, causing them to give up on redemption before they even try to seek it. He described the Island Boys as young men who seemed genuinely lost and caught up in confusing ideas rather than proof of anything supernatural. In fact, he said he wanted to pray with them rather than condemn them. That's what makes these clips so fascinating. One side presents them as direct evidence supporting the theory. The pastor looks at the exact same footage and sees two scared young men being manipulated by fear and misinformation. Then, as always, the conversation shifts to symbolism. Critics often point to Alex's forehead tattoo featuring the number 17, which he has said represents his angel number. Theorists, however, interpret it as another sign connected to the story he told. The Island Boys openly discussed the idea themselves, but the next artist on the list never made those kinds of claims. Instead, critics argue that his tattoos, religious imagery, and recurring numbers tell the story for him. Lil Wayne. Few artists in hip-hop have as many tattoos as Lil Wayne, with reports often estimating his collection at close to 100 pieces. Because of that, some people treat his body almost like a puzzle filled with hidden meanings. They begin with the cross tattoo on his forehead, which certain online discussions describe as inverted. Then they move to the skull imagery spread across different parts of his body. They also highlight the 999 tattoo, arguing that when viewed upside down, it resembles 666. Add in the teardrop tattoos, and, according to critics, the entire collection starts looking like a catalog of occult symbols and death-related imagery. The problem with that theory is that Wayne has explained many of these tattoos himself, and his explanations are usually much more personal than mysterious. The phrase, "Fear God," tattooed on his eyelids, for example, has been described by Wayne as a reminder to respect God whenever he sees his reflection. The letter C between his eyes is tied to both his mother, Sita, and his family name, Carter. As for the teardrops, Wayne has said they represent friends and family members lost to violence and tragedy, rather than the criminal myths often attached to those tattoos. One of those teardrops was even covered with a tribal design after a request from his mother. Critics have also analyzed the artwork for the Carter 3 series, particularly the famous baby photograph edited with Wayne's adult tattoos. Some interpret it as a symbol of innocence being transformed or corrupted. When the Carter sex arrived around June 2025, the timing alone was enough for certain corners of the internet to revive the familiar 666 conversation once again. This is the type of pattern-focused thinking that critics often connect to comments made by Cat Williams, who has argued that if a hidden system exists, supporters of that theory believe it stretches far beyond music and reaches into nearly every major industry.
Exist in religious circles, in politics, in the medical profession.
To the people who push these theories, Lil Wayne's tattoos aren't just artwork. They see them as evidence, a visual autobiography supposedly hiding in plain sight for anyone willing to decode it. Every symbol, every number, and every design becomes another piece of the puzzle in their eyes. And when it comes to reading hidden meanings into hand signs and public imagery, no names cast a bigger shadow over this conversation than the final duo on the list. These are the two figures many theorists have crowned as the unofficial king and queen of the entire narrative, Jay-Z and Beyoncé. We have finally reached the pair that sits at the center of almost every hip-hop Illuminati theory ever created. If this mythology has royalty, critics have already assigned Jay-Z and Beyoncé those roles. The discussion usually starts with the famous hand gesture. Jay-Z's diamond symbol, formed by connecting his thumbs and index fingers into a triangle, became one of the most recognizable signs in modern music culture. To supporters of the theory, that triangle represents the all-seeing eye associated with Illuminati and Masonic symbolism, displayed on one of the biggest stages in the world. Jay-Z has addressed the claim multiple times, including during conversations with Gayle King. According to him, the symbol originated during the early days of managing an R&B group that he believed would eventually sell 10 million records and achieve diamond status. The hand sign became a symbol of success, with the diamond representing the goal and Rockefeller representing the movement. Then critics moved to another frequently discussed connection. During behind-the-scenes footage related to Run This Town, Jay-Z wore a hoodie displaying the phrase, "Do what thou wilt," a famous quote associated with occultist Aleister Crowley. Even some writers who highlighted the reference described Jay-Z more as someone fascinated by provocative imagery than someone practicing occult beliefs. Another point often raised is his nickname Hova, which many interpret as a reference to Jehovah. Critics argue that it sounds like a claim to godhood, while Jay-Z has explained that the nickname came from friends praising his lyrical abilities, and that he has never been comfortable with people literally treating him as a god. Beyoncé becomes the other half of the discussion. Critics often connect her butterfly imagery to monarch mind control theories and interpret her triangle poses as extensions of the same pyramid symbolism. One of the most debated examples remains her 2016 Super Bowl performance of Formation, where some theorists claim the dancer's formations represented ritualistic geometry broadcast to millions of viewers. Beyoncé's camp has consistently framed the performance as a celebration of Black culture, Black pride, and a tribute to the legacy of the Black Panther movement, which is exactly how it was publicly presented. Then there is Sasha Fierce, the alter ego that critics probably discuss more than any other aspect of her career. Some people have tried to portray that persona as something supernatural or demonic, but Beyoncé herself addressed those claims directly during a conversation with Oprah Winfrey.
When does she show up? Usually when I hear the crowd, when I put on my stilettos, when like the moment right before when you're nervous and that other thing kind of takes over.
Beyoncé explained that Sasha Fierce was never meant to be anything mysterious or supernatural. She described it as a stage persona, a boost of confidence that emerged when she performed, much like an actor stepping into character before a scene. Later on, she said that she no longer needed Sasha Fierce because that confidence had become a natural part of who she was. Despite years of speculation, both Jay-Z and Beyoncé have repeatedly rejected the Illuminati rumors. Jay-Z has openly dismissed the theory as nonsense, while Beyoncé addressed it directly in the lyrics of Formation, calling the claims corny. Even Kanye West, who has often found himself connected to these conversations, once argued that if powerful hidden groups truly exist, people should be looking at major industries like energy and finance, rather than musicians, who often become convenient distractions. And that brings us back to the person whose comments fueled so much of this discussion in the first place. Cat Williams has said that one of the strangest parts of the entire conversation is that he felt forced to raise questions that, in his opinion, many others were unwilling to even discuss publicly.
Our side and God's side, none of that is even real. I gotta come and make it real.
The people who believe these theories look across every artist on this list and see a single pattern connecting them all. The artists themselves, however, have overwhelmingly offered very different explanations, describing the imagery as creative expression, performance art, rebellion, personal symbolism, or reflections of pain and loss. When you really strip away all the rumors, symbols, and internet speculation, the conversation becomes about something much bigger than the devil. The question at the center of it all is what people are willing to sacrifice, compromise, or give up in pursuit of success, fame, and power. And in the end, which interpretation makes the most sense is something every viewer has to decide for themselves.